Today we create this effect in CSS and HTML. First of all, we create a container class for all of our elements. Inside of this container class, we create a class with the name heading, and inside of this heading class, we create an h1 that says cool, for example. Right below this heading class, we create 5 spans. So we take one and we give this span the style of //i:1. And now we'll duplicate the span 4 times and we'll give the second span the class 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we start by styling our heading, and we go into our style sheet. We'll target our heading. We give it a color of white, for example, a font family of monospace, and we say that we want to have a font size of 16 pixels, for example. Now we want to have a letter spacing of probably 1 character, and like this it looks pretty good. Let's go into our index again, and now we want to target our spans. So we are going to target our container, and inside of this container we'll target our spans. Now inside of these spans we want to say that our container, first of all, has a width of 300 pixels and a height of 200 pixels. And inside of our span, we want to say that our span should take 100% of the width, 100% of the height, and our container has a position of relative. So our spans can have a position of absolute inside of our container. Obviously, I should also say that our heading should have a display of flex and justify center and align items of center so it is in the center. And obviously also a width of 100% and a height of 100%. So it's really centered. And now our heading is in the center, and I can visualize our spans for you so you get a better understanding of what we're doing. So we basically have our h1, this is our heading, and this is our container. And inside of this container we have those spans that are taking up 100% of the space, but right now they are not aligned properly. As you can see, they are aligned below our container. So let's say we have a position of absolute here, so we can say top 0 and left 0, which should align our containers at the top left. And now it works, as you can see. Now let's add a transform property, and we say rotate of 72 degrees, and we take 72 degrees because 72 times 5 is 360, so this makes basically 1 circle, and you'll see why we do this in a second. Now we are going to multiply this with a variable, and this variable is our I variable, which we've defined right here. So we have 5 I variables, if you want to say so, but we also need to put this one into our calculate function so that this really works. And now, as you can see, every container has a slight rotation that is a multiple of 72 degrees basically. So you might ask why, but you'll actually see in a second. We are now going to create a container span after element to create some content after, and we'll say we have a content that is basically empty. We'll have a width of 22 pixels, a height of 22 pixels, and let's say a background color of yellow. The background color doesn't really matter too much. Now let's give this one a position of absolute as well, and now you can see why we basically used this after element combined with our rotate function, because now we basically rotated every single container, every single span, and now with the after pseudo element we can basically create 5 squares that are slightly rotated and therefore have a similar spacing, or the exact same spacing if you want to be precise. So let's give our elements a border radius of 3 pixels, for example. And now I want to create more of those squares next to those squares. And we can do so by using the box shadow property, and I'll show you in a second. So we can basically go ahead and say we want to have a box shadow that has an X offset of 30 pixels, for example, 0 for Y, 0 for blur, and we'll take yellow. And now you could create a blur, so basically a glow for every single element, by saying you have a 30 pixel blur here, for example, and as you can see now it's basically glowing. But for the purpose of this tutorial, to really explain it as fast as possible and show it as fast as possible, I'll basically leave the box shadow away. So now we have one to the right, let's do another one to the left. So now we have a box shadow at the right and one at the left. So let's keep going by adding one at the top, and we can do so by using the Y offset and removing that one here. So we have an X offset of 0, a Y offset of 30 pixels, and a blur of 0 again. So we copy this once again, paste this right here, and now we'll have a Y offset of -30. And now we have those squares basically. The next thing we want to do is add the rotation animation, and we can do so by using add keyframes. Identifier is our move method, for example, or our move animation. We now say that we want to animate from, and we'll add a filter, and that filter is a U rotate, and we say we want to add from 0 degrees to, we copy this line, and we say we want to have a U rotate to 360 degrees. And as you can see, I'm going to take this method name now, and I'll add that one as an animation with a duration of 4 seconds and a timing function of linear delay of 0 and an infinite iteration count to our container span. We will now have that animation right here. And as you can see, it's basically animated. But I actually want to add a delay. So I'm going to add a delay right here by again using calculate. And again, we say we want to have a delay of probably 1.6 seconds. And we want to multiply this with our variable that we've defined earlier. So we're going to use var --i. Now, as you can see, the U changes separately for every single element. And now we can probably say that we want to have a animation duration of 8 seconds. But we want to add something else as well. We want to add transform and the rotate property, and we'll start at 0 degree again, and we are going to transform or basically rotate up to 360 degrees. And as you can see, this is our rotation around our text. Now we also want to rotate every single one of those elements individually, and we can do so by using the move method and also add that animation to our span after element basically. And now we should maybe also add infinite right here and make our animation timing a little bit less. So we say we have 5 seconds. And now as you can see, it rotates around itself and it rotates around the text. All we have to add now is basically a hover effect once we hover over our container. So we say container :hover. And once we hover over our container, we want to edit our span : after element. And we can do so by taking the box shadow. We basically want to change the box shadow in this case. And instead of just having a distance of 30 pixels in the X direction, for example, we could say we want to have 100 pixels here, for example, and we want to have -100 pixels right here. And once we hover, you can see that our cubes basically start to float into different directions. So now let's also add a transition property of, for example, all is 2 seconds. And as you can see, now the transition is basically smooth. So let's say this one has a gap of 100 pixels as well, and this one as well. And now we have this effect basically already. If you want to create more of those cubes, you could just copy those lines, for example, separate them with a comma and paste them in. And now you could, for example, say you want to replace 100 with 300 pixels, for example. And once you've done, you'll have more squares that will float basically further away. And this is the effect you get. Obviously, you can be creative and do whatever you want, but this is basically how it works and how you can create this effect in CSS and HTML.